I lost my job, couldn't pay my rent.
Many Washingtonians know hunger and get help from their local food bank.
It's here when I need it.
But as pandemic food benefits dry up, there's growing concern about a hunger cliff ahead.
Food insecurity is at an all-time high.
Falling donations and soaring food prices are adding to the challenge.
We've seen spikes of 60%, 100%.
And lawmakers are working to take care of the most vulnerable.
Our food bank's shelves are bare.
What's being done to stop community hunger, as more than 500,000 Washingtonians see a cut in their emergency food benefits?
Hunger is increasing.
Our panel weighs in.
This is hitting us at the worst possible time.
The need still persists.
Digesting the state and national nutrition crisis. Next on City Inside Out. Welcome to this edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. A boost in food benefits for those in need, which began in 2020 at the start of the pandemic, has ended this month. Advocates say that's put us on the edge of what they call a hunger cliff, as millions of Americans have to take a $90 to $250 monthly cut in food assistance. Lawmakers in Olympia are responding with a new funding measure aimed at boosting our food supplies and bridging the gap until the state's next budget cycle begins in July. But it's still a tenuous time for many Washingtonians, with high inflation and an unsettled economy dishing out plenty of question marks for the year ahead.
Well, now you see what I'm doing.
Vickie Seat is always ready to put in some extra work with the Hunger Intervention Program in Lake City.
Does anybody know where the steel wool is?
She's washing up after her team's effort to make meals for seniors in need, a population that 66-year-old Vickie, who suffers from macular degeneration, arthritis, and depression as a survivor of domestic violence, says she's definitely a part of.
I've been in shelters. I was in a transition housing for a year and a half, and now I have my own place. So it's hard.
Vickie is one of hundreds of thousands across Washington state who get help with their food budget through SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps.
They've helped me a lot.
The U.S. government boosted SNAP benefits 3 years ago at the start of the pandemic. But as of March of 2023, SNAP has been reduced back down to pre-pandemic levels. Vickie is keeping up a good attitude, even though she's lost $95 very important dollars a month. She tries to keep her focus on the growing needs of others around her.
I want to be helpful. Even with my health and stuff, I try to be as helpful as I can.
And the reality is that food insecurity is at an all-time high.
State Representative Mia Gregerson of the 33rd District in SeaTac says, we're on the edge of what advocates call a hunger cliff. More than 500,000 people in our state have lost a total of nearly $100 million a month in assistance.
Beginning next month, my food budget will shrink dramatically.
That cut in SNAP benefits from $200 a month down to $23 in some cases comes at a time when inflation continues to affect everyone's budget.
Human suffering is real, and we wanted to show that we can get money into the pockets of people quicker.
Gregerson is sponsoring House Bill 1784, an early action measure that would push $28 million towards relieving hunger in Washington this spring, a temporary fix before the state's budget cycle kicks in this July.
And so just trying to ease that cliff, that's what we're trying to do. Also to give us time to figure out how do we continue to close the gap in poverty.
The bulk of the funding would go to emergency food providers, and not a moment too soon.
Our food bank's shelves are bare.
Statewide, food banks are struggling to keep up with suddenly rising demand.
We already know that a third of our customers are accessing another food bank, and we just think that that's going to deepen with the loss of SNAP benefits.
Joe Gruber is executive director of the U District Food Bank, which serves more than 1,200 households a month. But those numbers are increasing, part of a perfect storm along with low donations and a price hike of at least 10% from wholesale suppliers.
When we're buying $750,000 worth of food every year, that increase of 10% makes a significant difference as to how much inventory we have on our shelves.
$20 million of the state proposal would go towards food banks, with the remaining $8 million going towards a senior nutrition program and a boost to provide more fruits and vegetables.
That's exciting, but it needs to be kind of moved forward quickly.
I know you can do this. You're going to make this is not a partisan issue.
Our state's First Lady and others helped gain unanimous support for HB 1784 in the House.
Substitute House Bill 1784 is declared pass.
But even with that state bill working towards final approval, federal leaders considering the renewal of SNAP benefits as part of the Farm Bill this fall still hold the long-term future of food security in their hands.
It's here when I need it.
Will help for the hungry bee here in years to come? That's the hope, as state leaders work on a temporary fix to keep hunger in our state from going off a cliff.
Yeah, we're going to see food on the shelves, food in people's mouths.
If I was able to, I would support it because of what they did for me.
And joining us to discuss this very important issue further, we have with us Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal. Thank you very much for being here. Represents our 7th U.S. Congressional District. Really appreciate that. We also have with us Christina Wong, Director of Public Policy and Advocacy for Northwest Harvest. Christina, good to have you too. And we also have Marie Spiker. She is an assistant professor at the University of Washington, co-lead researcher of Washington State's annual food security survey. Dr. Spiker, good to have you too. Let me jump right into it. And Congresswoman Jayapal, help us set the stage in terms of where we are right now in March of 2023. At the start of this month, about 30 million people across the country saw their food assistance benefits significantly reduced. And we're talking about the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program here, folks, or SNAP. We'll probably be using that term a lot today, formerly known as food stamps here. So these benefits were increased at the start of the COVID pandemic in 2020, but now they're going back down to pre-pandemic levels. Before we get into exactly what you're going to do about that, can you tell us where we are, your concerns about the people who are impacted by this?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me on, and I'm glad to be here with such experts on the topic. Brian, this is about hunger. Food stamps, SNAP benefits, it's about nutrition assistance. And this is a benefit that the federal government gives to make sure people are not hungry. It's that simple. We are actually the only developed country that requires things in order to get these benefits. Most countries, developed countries, have this benefit built into their safety net programs. Here with SNAP, we've had the requirements around needing to work, for example, a limited amount of time, only 3 months that you can get this if you're an adult. Without dependent children. There are a number of requirements that we put on these nutrition programs, which in my view are not helpful. We should get rid of them. Yeah. But where we are now is that we had additional benefits during COVID. Those have gone away. States are having to absorb that problem. It's impossible to do because this is a large number of people, and hunger is increasing, and food banks are seeing increased activity, and so that's really what we're dealing with. We're also going to have to reauthorize this program this summer with the Farm Bill, and we can talk more about that.
Thank you for bringing that up. But Christina, I did want to talk about this in terms of the impact this change in benefits is having on Northwest Harvest. Are more people coming to you for help? Has this impacted your food supply? I know inflation's still a big deal for everybody involved, food banks included. What's going on?
Thanks for that question, Brian. I would say that this is hitting us at the worst possible time, really. Food banks for the last few months already have been seeing a significant increase in the number of people that are coming to our doors, anywhere between 30% increase to some have even been reported double the amount. It's not surprising. I think all of us, whether you've actually had to go to a food bank or not, can see why this is happening when you go into your grocery store and you're seeing this higher cost of food, when you're going to fill up your gas tank and the higher cost of gas. So, and then also add into it the higher cost of housing. So across the board, those higher costs mean that for somebody who is struggling to put food on the table, the reason why it's impacting them is because food is sort of that flexible necessity. If I don't pay my rent, for instance, my landlord's going to knock on my door with an eviction notice. But if I skip a meal in order to save that money to pay the rent, nobody's going to knock on my door. And with the cuts to SNAP benefits that people are experiencing, really their only other option is the food bank. It's that safety net. The reason why I say it's hitting us at the worst time is because we are challenged by the same challenges that are driving people to come to our food bank. The higher cost of food, the higher cost of gas has all been impacting our supply. For Northwest Harvest, our current food inventory is 80% lower than what it was this time last year.
Wow, and I want to dive into some of these solutions in a bit, but thanks for laying all that out there. Dr. Spiker, I'd love to hear some more numbers from you here, just in terms of what you found in your recent statewide food security survey. If you could first explain to us what food insecurity is, and then talk about where this statistic has been going over the past 3 years in our state, because that trend has not been positive.
Yeah, so thanks for that question. Thanks for having me. When we're talking about food insecurity, we are talking about hunger. We're talking about households who are struggling to afford food. There's an element of quantity. How long is this food going to last before I have the money to get more? There's also an element of quality. Can people get access to foods that they want to be eating, balanced meals, things that they're excited about, things that they know are good for them? And when we're measuring food insecurity, we're also picking up on this element of worry. Are you worried about where your next meal is going to come from? Are you worried about where your kids' next meal is going to come from? So these are the things that we pick up on when we're measuring household food insecurity. And I am part of a team of researchers at the University of Washington and Washington State University. We recently conducted a 4th round of statewide survey data from households here in Washington State. And what we're seeing from a survey that was open December 2022 into January 2023, so sort of a snapshot in time of recently, just a couple months ago, and before any of the extra pandemic boosts to SNAP have expired. As of that time, when we look at our just over 5,000 respondents, and I want to note that we oversampled among lower income households, we see that among that sample, about half, so 49% of our respondents were experiencing food insecurity. So about half of our respondents in that 5,000 households sample struggling to afford food, having that sense of worry about where's my next meal going to come from, where's my kid's next meal going to come from. And Christina, you mentioned this idea of skipping meals. With food insecurity, we start to see concerning things that we know affect people's nutrition and health status. We started to see in our data, actually across the board, whether people are experiencing food insecurity or not, a lot of coping strategies that families are engaging with to deal with higher food prices. Across the board, 80% of our samples said that they are concerned about higher food prices in the next 6 months. But among our households experiencing food insecurity, 93%, almost universally, they are worried about high food prices. And so some of the coping strategies that we see in the data, yes, people are choosing, eating out less, changing where they're shopping, but importantly with implications for nutrition, buying less produce, less fruits and vegetables, less dairy, less meat, those nutrient-rich foods that we know are really important for people's health.
And I was amazed to find that people are more concerned about food prices than they are about rent prices right now, which was the first time ever, as I understand it from your study there. Thank you for breaking that down. I would like to go back to you, Christina, here and talk about some of the short-term solutions going on here. The state is working on this plan, a pretty rare early action bill to pump $28 million into food benefits over the next several months, basically tide these things over in our state until July when the next budget cycle begins. What's that going to do? Talk to us about that.
Thanks for that question. So this is House Bill 1784, put together by Representative Mia Gregerson and Representative Tim Ornsby. That's really important, right? Because we're talking about the vice chair and the chair of House Appropriations, hearing from community programs about how we don't have resources to meet this immediate hunger cliff that's happening in March. It's not something that we were able to plan for, certainly not something that we could turn around and raise money in the private sector on such a short time frame. And so they are proposing for this current state fiscal year, so this is just to take us through, as you said, to June 30th. It is $28 million in total. And that certainly is not backfilling the loss of SNAP benefits coming from the federal government. That is a total of around $95 million that we are losing every month. But what it is doing is it is shoring up the ability of community programs to be able to respond in 3 ways. The first is to put some funding into our food banks so that we can have assistance with buying food, also paying some of those gas transportation issues for food. The second program area is for senior meals. because it's actually low-income seniors who are living on their own who only qualify for what's called the minimum SNAP benefit.
Yeah.
And I want to take a quick moment just to explain that for those individuals, the cut in SNAP benefits is going from over $250 per month during COVID to just $23 per month.
Right.
And so this gives them the ability to go get a hot meal or have a meal delivered to them instead of having to come to the food bank. And then the last area is what we call our SNAP match programs or the produce match. So when people go to the grocery store, use their SNAP benefits to buy fruits and vegetables, as Dr. Spiker was just saying, is a high cost item, right? So that helps increase the spending ability of SNAP to be able to afford those fruits and vegetables. And they get matching dollars to be able to buy more.
Great. Congresswoman Jayapal, you've heard a little bit about what our state lawmakers are working on, and I know you said in a tweet a couple of weeks ago, the situation we're in is unacceptable. It's time to step up and do more. Talk to us about that. What does that mean? What are you working on at the federal level? We can talk about the Farm Bill, wherever you want to go.
Well, two things. First, during the pandemic time, the Progressive Caucus, which I chair, was absolutely key in making sure we got these expanded SNAP benefits. And I think it's important for everyone to understand that this is both the right thing to do to help people who need food, basic food. It's also driving our economy. I mean, when you see cutbacks in benefits, it affects grocery stores, it affects jobs, it affects our entire economy. So it's actually both a self-preservation thing and a bigger community responsibility. Second, this cut in benefits, that going back to pre-pandemic levels, is pushing about 32 million Americans into a hunger cliff, about 500,000 in Washington state, who are really going to be at the bottom of the barrel in terms of this cut to benefits. Third, we think about food stamps or SNAP benefits. I like to say nutrition assistance because a lot of people don't know what SNAP is.
Right.
But nutrition assistance programs is being maybe something in Health and Human Services. It's not. It actually, in the federal government, it comes through a bill called the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill gets reauthorized every certain number of years, and this year is the year that the Farm Bill gets reauthorized. Part of what's happening is we need to make up for the benefits that people are losing, which I have not much hope is going to happen, unfortunately, because the House is in Republican control. And we need to make sure that when we reauthorize the Farm Bill, that we do better than even what we had before, but at a minimum, keep it at the same level. The Republicans just introduced this week, 2 days ago, a bill to cut SNAP, to cut nutrition assistance programs. They want to make it a longer period of time, essentially, where you would be eligible for, where you would be required to have work benefits, and they want to cut the actual benefit.
Right.
And to me, this is just cruelty. We are at a time of tremendous difficulty across the country with higher inflation, all the costs that Christina was talking about, all the food insecurity that Dr. Spiker was talking about. And they are saying that the way to make this better is through more work requirements. We know that doesn't work. And we also know that they're framing this in terms of cutting costs. But listen, the deficit, which they're so concerned about, is made up of two things: spending and revenue. The president has great proposals to bring in revenue through increasing taxes on the wealthiest that would bring in a lot more money than any cut to SNAP would bring in. So that's the work we have to do, is reauthorize the Farm Bill and make sure that the nutrition assistance program is stronger, not weaker.
Thank you. And I'd like to engage, if I could, some of that criticism from Republicans who are saying, this is a program that is somehow making people more dependent on benefits, et cetera. And I just want to make sure I touch on this. And Dr. Spiker, it's a devil's advocate question here, but I want to engage that. Are we making people more dependent on aid programs, not helping them be more self-sufficient? Can you touch on that?
When you look at who participates and benefits from the SNAP program nationwide, I think about 43% are children, 16% are seniors. So more than half are children and seniors, people for whom going and getting a job, that argument doesn't hold. And the other thing is, I do hear that sentiment a lot. And what I ask people to think about is that, if anyone finds themselves in a time in their life that they have the luxury of not thinking so much about their grocery costs, right? So many people, when you go to the grocery store, we're having sticker shock. We're adding up the prices in our heads, right, at the checkout line. And if you're a person that's not a part of your daily life, that's not a part of your reality, just the next time at the grocery store to really pay attention to what's going on with food prices. Right now, or as of January, I think the average price of a carton of eggs, does anybody know what it is?
Oh boy, it's up over 3, isn't it, right now?
$4.82.
Okay.
It's $4.82, which is just...
That's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot. I think a year ago, it was commonplace to be able to find a carton of eggs for under $2. And so, you know, a lot of things driving that. One is the avian flu epidemic that's been happening worldwide. But when you look at something like almost $5 for a carton of eggs, or you go to certain grocery stores, you look around and you're seeing them for $6, $7, $8, $9 for a carton of eggs, and you think about that $5 carton of eggs, that hits a household budget differently when you earn $15 an hour than when you earn $40, right? I mean, 20 minutes of work for a carton of eggs that you can go through that carton of eggs in a single breakfast cooking for your family.
Please.
But also, the other thing about work requirements is the vast majority, it's a tiny percentage of people who don't work when they're in the category of work requirements. It is not true that the majority of people are trying not to work and stay home. And so I think we really have to take on that whole notion that A, people aren't working, and B, if they're able to, and B, that it helps at all to increase self-sufficiency, because the reality is if you're not able to eat and your children aren't able to learn, it is actually hurting you, your family, and the entire community, because people are not able to do the things that we need them to do.
Thank you. And I want to move on to another point here, if I could. And Christina, maybe I can start with you, because I do think about these short-term solutions that we're dealing with here, but then I start thinking about the long-term systemic solutions that are needed as well. And as important as the work of Northwest Harvest is, I know there's a part of you that wishes we could get to better solutions and that a service like that wasn't needed. Talk to me about longer-term systemic changes, the way our nation approaches hunger and income inequality, because I think those two are inextricably linked.
Well, I think the Congresswoman knows this best, right? That the fact that we have poverty, the fact that we have child poverty, it is a policy choice as well as a morality choice. What the pandemic has really shown us has been things like the expanded child tax credit, for instance. You could see while that was in place, literally, hunger for households with children dropped by 40% as soon as those expanded benefits went in place. And then when they stopped going in place, guess what was the percentage of child hunger went back up again? It was 40%. Also, the reason why we're experiencing this hunger cliff now is because of the cut to the temporary boost to SNAP benefits. We would really love to see in the Farm Bill the recognition that SNAP benefits need to be modernized in order to be able to afford just even basic nutrition. They are currently based on something called the low-cost food plan. I mean, sorry, the thrifty food plan, which is sort of a market basket that USDA has put together to help guide people about, based on their budgetary needs, what they could afford to buy. The thrifty food plan was designed for emergency purposes only, not for basic nutrition. There's a study that's been done before that has said that essentially with food prices today, it's like asking a family of four to live on a fish stick and a slice of cheese. So we have been advocates for going up to the next level market basket, which is the low-cost food plan. And that would increase SNAP benefits, because right now, even when we take out the cost of living adjustments and the changes that were made to the thrifty food plan last year, SNAP benefits are still on average $2 per meal.
Wow, thank you for that. We need to start wrapping up the show. I thank you for all the input here, but maybe Dr. Spiker, I can get some last thoughts from you. Assuming there's some funding for another food security survey, a 5th round at the end of this year, what do you think you're going to find? If you can give me the 1-minute version, that'd be great.
You know, the thing that I think is the most important is just that we need to keep measuring. And the idea that our different programs might expand and contract, expand when there is need and contract when there isn't, we can't make those decisions without data. And, you know, when we look at this data, this snapshot as of a couple months ago, we see that the need still persists. And just because pandemic protections are ending doesn't mean the need has ended, doesn't mean the pandemic and its multifold economic impacts and these accumulated financial stressors on households doesn't mean that those things have ended. And so when we look at this recent data, when we see that half of the households households in our sample are still struggling with food insecurity, still struggling to afford food, still worrying about where their next meal is going to come from. We see that still persisting. And so it's tough for me to say what we might find in the next round, but I think the most important thing is that we continue to measure, because we can't say if we're not measuring it, the problem isn't there. As a researcher, I can't abide that.
No,
So,
thank you for
yeah.
bringing that piece up. Christina, some final thoughts from you. I know state lawmakers are still talking about a lot of this as we record this show right now, and there is plenty of support at the state capitol, but some final thoughts for legislators in a minute, if you could.
Well, as you know, I would say along the lines of what Dr. Spiker was saying, is that food insecurity is something that we can expect to be with us for the long term. We can also look at the history that was set by what we saw during the economic recovery from the Great Recession, which was that visits to food banks actually spiked then and then plateaued, never really came fully back down. That's because people are coming to food banks as their final safety net. And so we really ask the legislature to take into consideration how they can help us out, not just by stocking our shelves, that's certainly helpful, but by funding the variety of investments in our human services that takes down the need for food banks as well.
Thank you for that. Congresswoman Jayapal, I'll let you have the last word here. You spent a lot of your career working on these issues of inequality, of income inequality specifically, and hunger and food insecurity, I think, are a piece of that too. Where do we need to go? Help us wrap this up, please.
Well, as Christina said, and I've been saying, poverty is a policy choice, a bad policy choice, and we know how to fix it. We actually know how to fix it. We passed the child tax credit. We got survival checks for people during the pandemic. We allowed people to have a little bit more breathing room. We took away some of the requirements that actually provide barriers for the people who are most vulnerable to access the programs. And we need to do that again. We need to make sure that we are thinking about the basic needs of a family. That's food, that's education, that's a lot of these things that our social safety net programs focus on, that those are investments in all of our future. And that the way to pay for that, we as a country do not suffer from scarcity, we suffer from greed. We have a tax system that's unfair, and income inequality and wealth inequality have really risen. So I've got a lot of bills for that, including a wealth tax, an ultra-millionaire's wealth tax. The president is proposing some of these things. We actually got a couple of revenue pieces passed in the last congressional budget. And so that's the focus that we need to have. Let's make sure people have the basic needs taken care of. That is an investment in all of us.
Thank you all for the input here, and we will be right back. What are people saying on social media about the looming hunger cliff? One person writes, "No one in America should wonder how they're going to get their next meal. We need to do more to combat hunger." Another person says, "Poverty is rampant. Why do politicians spend their time helping other countries, but not the very people they are elected to serve?" We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Coming up next time, voters in King County will decide in a special election whether to approve a $1.25 billion mental health levy. Supporters say more crisis centers are needed to serve the county's 2.3 million people. Get the details before you cast your ballot on the next City Inside Out. I hope you join us.